Well, we are going to conclude Hebrews chapter 2 today. We're going to go Hebrews 2:10 through 18. And so let's just read. I'm going to read sort of my translation of these opening verses, of the first 9 verses of chapter 2. And so the writer of Hebrews, again, writes to this persecuted congregation, wanting them to hold on, to remind them of who they are, these Jewish believers. Again, many of them may have been served as priests. Even some maybe have been priests at the temple at a season, but now they're facing an enormous amount of persecution from outside and inside. And when you have that happen, there can be a disillusionment. You can begin to question things and wait just a second. And so he points back to Yeshua in chapter 1, and you can catch up on that. And he said here, because of this, because we've basically we're just about to inherit salvation. You're just about there, and God has sent ministering. He has sent ministering spirits, ministering angels, as it were, to minister to you, to those who are just about to inherit salvation. Because of this, it's a must, and abundantly so, that we grasp to ourselves that which we have heard, that we cling to what we have heard so that we don't drift away. For if the word which was spoken through angels was made to be firm, and each transgression and disobedience, every not hearing of it, every neglect of it, received righteous recompense or a just payback, he says, how are we to escape neglecting or ignoring so great a salvation after first having received what was spoken by the Lord from those who heard, it having been confirmed to us? So if the message given through angels, i.e. the Torah, was if by neglecting it there was significant consequence, and a righteous one at that, here we have been God spoke to our fathers through the prophets, but he's spoken to us through a son. And we're about to inherit the salvation that's been given to us through the Son, who has made purification for our sins, who's sitting at the right hand of the Father, the one through whom all things have been made. And he says, and so, we can't neglect that. So if we do, we've got to cling to what has been spoken by him, so that we don't begin to drift away. It says God was bearing witness with and around what had been spoken and heard by both signs and miraculous wonders and various power displays and the portions or distributions from the Holy Spirit according to his desire. And just real quick, I recognize that a lot of my translation isn't as clean as some of the traditional translations, but I'm kind of going off of what we have kind of discussed as we've gone along to bring out some of those words, but that the flow isn't as always nice as in our other versions. I recognize that. Verse 5, for it was not to angels that he has subjected the world that is about to come, concerning which we are speaking, or that what we're speaking about. We're talking about this world that is to come, but it's been testified somewhere, someone saying, what is man that you're reminded of him? The Son of Man that you would watch over him. You have made him a little lower, this one, than angels. With glory and honor you crowned him. You subjected all things under his feet. And we talked yesterday about how there's this line that's left saying, putting everything made by your hand, you gave him rulership over, and that he has bypassed that. He's skipped that clause, but by skipping it, he's really drawing attention to it because he's drawing attention to this reality that it wasn't to angels that God had given rulership of this world, and it's certainly not about the world to come, but somewhere someone said, what is man, that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man that you would watch over him. And so he draws attention there. It says, for in the subjection of all things, nothing was remitted or from being or forgiven from being subject to him. Like there's nothing that got a pass from being subject to humanity. But at present, in the present, right now, we are not yet perceiving everything having been subjected to him. Like look around, it doesn't look like things are subjected or under the dominion, the rulership of humanity. It says, but now, and he says, but this one having been made for a little while lower than the angels, we have seen. Like we don't see the evidence in this world of this world truly being under the proper dominion of humanity. But what we do see is Yeshua. Because of the suffering of death, he has been crowned with glory and honor. He has been crowned with glory and honor through his death, right? So that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. So now we continue today and continues to expound this point about how he tasted death for all. Verse 10 says, for it was fitting for God, for whom and through whom all things exist, in leading many sons to glory, to perfect through the sufferings, to perfect through sufferings the initiator of their salvation. Now, I'm going to take a little time on this passage, this verse today. We're going all the way through verse 18. The text says here when you read it in the TLV, right, it says, for it was fitting for God. But it doesn't actually use the word God there. It doesn't say theos. It actually says, for it was fitting for him. So who? It was fitting for who? Well, the most scholars and interpreters, people a lot smarter than me, interpret the him as referring to the Father. For it was fitting for the Father, for whom and through whom all things exist. But I actually, that doesn't hold with, like, it's weird for me. I know I say this often. I recognize I'm not a Greek scholar. I can manage my way with Greek or Hebrew using the tools and looking into that, and I can get a grasp on certain things. I recognize that I'm not a scholar. But just when I look at the context and it says, for it was fitting through him, and that in just the previous verse, it just mentioned Yeshua. And actually, I don't know if you recognize this, but really for the first time in the letter to this point, his name is spoken in verse 9. Right? Up until now, it's talked to, but we have a son. God has spoken to us through a son. And now in verse 9, it brings out his name, Yeshua, right? It says that in verse 9 that Yeshua has been crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of his death. By the grace of God, he partook, tasted death for everyone in verse 9. Verse 10, for it was fitting for him, the one just mentioned. And someone says, well, but it says, through whom are all things and from whom are all things. Right. That the writer of Hebrews in chapter 1 made that point, didn't he? He said, he spoke of, God has spoken to us through a son, right? And in Hebrews 1, 2, and this is my translation, where it said, concerning these last days or these final days, he has spoken to us through a son whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the Ionas, the ages, the epochs, the eternal, through whom he made all things. And then it says later, it says that all things are held, speaking of the Son, all things are held together by the power of his word, or the word of his power. And so it says here, it was fitting for him, from whom and through whom all things have been made. That's Yeshua, the living word, right? It was fitting for Yeshua to lead many into glory. That's what to lead many sons or many children. The word is huios is sons, but it can be children. And it's not, it would be like a family. Like, most languages where you have feminine and masculine words, well, just like in our language growing up, if we wanted to, if you had, the masculine is what you would always choose. So if you were saying sons and daughters in Greek, you would say, use the word for sons. Same thing in Hebrew. So when it's saying bringing many huios, many sons, it has to do with sons and daughters. It has to do with like siblings, as it were. But many sons into glory. So, and it says he was leading. The word in Greek is agagonta, and so this word is the root word is ago, which is to go. And it like agomen means let us go, let's go. And it says here, it says in several of the compounds surrounding this word bear a similar sense. So he's leading, saying, come on, let's go. Like he's leading the charge. It seemed fitting for him, for the one from that all things are from and through whom are all things, to lead many sons. He was going to lead the charge. It was fitting. It was appropriate. By fitting, it's suitable. It fit who he is. It fit everything about him. And it was fitting for him to lead many sons into glory. And then it says here at the end, it says, I'm going to stick with the Greek here, so hang with me. Ton archigon tis soterias auton. The archigon, which is the originator, the pioneer, the founder, the initiator. Archigon is the one who started it, the founder, the initiator of their salvation. So it says the founder, the initiator, the pioneer of their salvation through suffering to perfect. Okay. That is that confusing? So literally, if I were to read the Greek in order here, it says, for it was fitting to him, through whom all things through whom all things and from whom all things are, many sons into glory he was leading, the originator of their salvation through suffering. And then the final word is teleosai, to perfect. The word teleos means to perfect, to reach to conclusion, to bring to the goal, to arrive at its purpose. So when in Romans chapter 10, when it says Messiah is the teleos of the law, he is the goal, the conclusion, the perfection, the point of it all. It reaches its fulfillment in him. And so in saying the originator, the archigon of their salvation through suffering to complete, to perfect. That last verb is an infinitive, it's an aorist infinitive verb. So it doesn't tell us who he's perfecting. It doesn't say he is perfecting, it says to perfect or to complete. So and again, forgive me if I'll wrap this up and if I'm getting bogged down in the details, but most translators and scholars say, and people much smarter than me, I'll acknowledge, much smarter than me, they move that perfect in front, and they say, for instance, in the NASV, it says, to perfect the author of their salvation through sufferings. It seemed fitting for him, and they think it refers to the Father, to perfect the author of their salvation, to complete the author of their salvation through sufferings. And then the commentators go on to explain, well, how can he perfect or complete? Why would the Father have to perfect or complete the one who is already perfect or who is already complete? What does that mean? And they give all these roundabout explanations of that. And again, these guys are smarter than me. But to me, when I read the natural reading of the text to me, my alternative view, which I will humbly offer up, and you can consider it and go with this, or say, nah, this guy's an amateur, doesn't know what he's talking about, and I'm fine with that too. But it says, basically, Yeshua is leading many sons into glory. The author, the initiator of their faith to completion, leading them to perfection. It's talking about what he's doing for them, for us, leading us to the goal through his suffering, leading us to the conclusion through his suffering. So it says, for it was fitting for him, the one through whom all things were made, the one for whom all things were made, to lead many sons into glory. The author of their salvation, the author of salvation through suffering to perfect, to perfect them, to complete them. That's through his suffering to lead those many sons to their goal, to perfection, to lead us through sufferings to the goal, to the perfection. So it doesn't somehow say that the Father is somehow completing the one who is already complete, the one through whom all the universe was made, the one that holds all things together by his hands. No, he was already complete, but it seemed fitting for him to lead us into glory, many sons, through suffering, to bring to completion, to perfection. And I'll back up, or what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of times, if you're looking, there's another more famous verse later in the very same book, so it's by the same writer using the same words in Hebrews chapter 12. In Hebrews chapter 12, it speaks of Yeshua, the initiator, the archigon, right? The originator, the founder, and the perfecter, the teleotein, the completer, the one who brings about the goal of faith. Keep your eyes on Yeshua, the one who is the archigon, the initiator of our faith, and the one who brings it to fulfillment, the one who finishes what he started. And then we see that right here at the beginning of the book, in chapter 2, where it says it seemed fitting for him, right? Through suffering, the initiator of our faith, through suffering, to bring us to conclusion. So keep your eyes on him, because you've not yet suffered to the point of death, he later says in Hebrews chapter 12. So that's my reading of this. Okay, so again, so Yeshua is the trailblazer. He's the one leading the charge, saying, let's go, leading many sons, many children into, because we've been spoken to, the word God has spoken to us through a son, but not just any son. And that's what's critical. He's not just any son. He's the one that we're told about as he is the one that is the possessor of all things, through whom all things were made, that he is the radiance of God's glory, that he is the exact imprint of the very essence of God, that he holds all things together by the power of his word, and having made purification for our sins, now sits at the right hand of the Father. That's who this son is. And it seemed fitting for that son to lead many sons into glory through suffering to perfection, to completion. Okay, so then he's bringing us to, restoring us to what we were intended to be. Verse 11, for both he who sanctifies and those being sanctified are all from one. So he is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. So what you've got right here, just very briefly, the one that's sanctifying and the one who is sanctified are all from one. From one, all of them from one. Or from one, all of them. And the idea is that the one who sanctifies, for Jewish people, right, dealing with within the context of the sacrificial system, the temple that's still standing, because it's still the 60s of the temple, that the priest and the ones that he's the one who sanctifies and those who are sanctified, the ones to whom he ministers, are all of the same stock. They're all from one. right? They're all from Abraham, which he's going to talk about the seed of Abraham later. They're all from one. So the very one, the priest and the one who sanctifies and the one being sanctified are all from the same. They're all from one. And so in the same way, so for an Aaron, the high priest, and the people he sanctifies are all brothers and sisters. They're all from one. So giving that idea, so the one who sanctifies and the one being sanctified are all from one. And so he is not, it says, so he is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. To call them, he is not ashamed to call them brothers, adelphus, which includes brothers and sisters. That's why we say that. It just uses the word adelphus. And so now he quotes, he's saying, I will announce, or I will proclaim your name to my brothers and sisters in the midst of the congregation. I will sing praise to you. Right? So here, he's quoting from Psalm 22, which any early believers would have very much associated anything stated in Psalm 22, would have associated that with Yeshua. Of course, the opening verse of Psalm 22 is, my God, why have you forsaken me? So later in Psalm 22, in the 23rd verse, he says, I will declare your name to my brothers. I will praise you amid the congregation. So that the speaker all the way through there is the one who now calls them my brothers. So yes, it's David, but it's the son of David. And then, the writer of Hebrews is using Greek language here. So he uses the word ecclesia in the midst of the congregation. He uses ecclesia to translate the word kohel, which is the kehillah, the assembly, in the midst of the congregation. So by calling them, saying, I'm going to proclaim your name in the midst of the congregation, that he is among brothers and sisters. He's leading many sons into glory. He's the head. He's the representative head of new humanity, right? Of a new ecclesia, of a kehillah, of an assembly. And so it's easy to see, actually. So when he quotes from Psalm 22 here, it's easy to see the relevance, because that was clearly a messianic psalm. And then he continues, verse 13, he says, and again, so now quoting from a different verse, I will put my trust in him, and again, here I am and the children God has given me. So those two verses that he quotes, they're separated, right, by and again this, and again that. But they're actually back-to-back verses in the scripture. They're from Isaiah 8:17 and 8:18. And it's not as easy to grasp the point that he's making. I mean, we understand why what he's making from Psalm 22, but when he quotes, I will put my trust in him, it doesn't use the typical word for trust here. It uses the word in Greek using pepoithos, which is to be convinced, to be persuaded concerning him. In Hebrew, the word used is hope. So if you look at Isaiah 8:17, this is what he's quoting. Isaiah writes this, I will wait for Adonai, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look eagerly for him. And he says, I will hope for him, kavah, right? I will hope for him. I will wait for him. And so he points back to this passage in Isaiah, which at first glance, is he just randomly picking passages and using, what point is he making? But the passage in Isaiah, the context very clearly points, if we back up, let's look back up at Isaiah 8:13. We see the overarching message here in Isaiah. Isaiah 8:13 says, Adonai Tsevaot, him you will sanctify, and let him be your fear, trembling at him. He will be a sanctuary. He will be a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So it's speaking of this one who will be a sanctuary, this one who will be a rock of offense, this one who will be a trap, a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Many among them will stumble, fall, and be broken, snared, and caught. Bind up the testimony, seal the instruction with my disciples. Verse 17, I will wait for Adonai, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope for him, or I will put my trust in him, is what is the idea. And that's what he's quoting here. I will look eagerly for him. Verse 18, here I am with the children Adonai has given me as signs and wonders in Israel, from Adonai Tzevaot, who dwells on Mount Zion. So in the third quotation, here I am with the children God has given me, in the immediate context in Isaiah, that's actually pointing, Isaiah was talking about, the reason it's broken up is there is a break in the text. And so now Isaiah is actually speaking originally of his own children to some degree. And so you can see double fulfillment there. Because you have Isaiah whose children were named as signs, right? I mean, his first son is Shear Yashuv. Isaiah's name Yeshayahu means Adonai is salvation. And his first son, Shear Yashuv, is a remnant will return. And his second son is what everyone wants to name their kid, Mahar Shalal Hashbaz, which is hasten to the plunder, speed to the spoil. And those were the dominant themes of his message. So Isaiah is saying, here I am with the children God has given me. His sons' names were expressions. His sons were expressions of his own trust in the Lord. His sons were a picture of his trust. Despite whatever you see, here I am. And the children God has given me are an expression of my trust and my hope in him, that he will accomplish his purposes. And so that the Son of God is saying, here I am with the children God has given me. Here I am with the sons or the children that bear witness, that they are a token as a witness of that the last has not been heard of Yeshua, that he sits at the right hand of the Father, and now his quiver, his arrows, the sons that he is leading into glory are there as a witness. And that's the point the author here is making. Verse 14. It says, therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared the same humanity, so that through death he might break the power of the one who had the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who by fear of death were in bondage all their lives. So I'm going to give you my literal reading. Since therefore, this is my version, Antonio, if you want to skip over to verse 14 in mine. And it says, since therefore the children share in flesh and blood and flesh, he also in the same way tasted or partook of the same, in order that through death he might nullify the power of the one who held or possessed death. And this one is the devil or the accuser. So in verse 10, the Son saw it fitting to lead many sons to glory through suffering, to perfect them, to make them complete. Verse 11, a priest and the people he represents, the people he sanctifies, are of the same stock. So if that's who he is, which the book will make even this chapter later will make that point, that he is the great high priest, and he is not ashamed to be, that he is of them, he has come to be among them. He's not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. And verses 12 and 13 point to that reality has been pointed to in the scriptures. It's been waiting there. As the Lord has laid that there, that he is proclaiming them as his brothers in the midst of the assembly. But for that to be actual, for that to not simply be symbolic, for him to actually be the priest of the same stock who stands on their behalf, for him to be actually the priest, it says here, he partook of the same. It says children. He gives us an example, like a parable here. Children share in the same blood and flesh, it says. Right? Family, my children all share, my children, Rivka and my children share in the same blood and flesh. They're of the same blood and flesh. right? All of my kids share the same blood and flesh. And so it says, and so in the same way, likewise, so this son, leading many sons, who he calls brothers and sisters, he, meteschen, he shared or he partook, he tasted. It's meta echo, which is he grasped with, he took to himself. He partook of the same. In the same way, he partook, he shared of the same. So the same humanity is of the same flesh and blood. That's in the same, children share of the same blood and flesh, and in the same way he partook. He took to himself the same. In order that through his death, that he would nullify the power, and the word for nullify here is katergeo, which is to bring something to a standstill, to stop it, to bring it to a screeching halt, as it were, to nullify, to abolish, to make of no effect. And so that what he would do is make of no effect the power of the one who held death. The power of the one who held death, who had grasped death. And then he clarifies, in case you don't know, that is Diablo, the devil, or it means the accuser, the one who hurls through, who speaks through, which is to make accusation. So it says, he became flesh and blood. He partook of the same, so that through his death he would nullify the power of the one who held death. That is the devil. That the devil's power has been, the accuser's power has now been brought to a standstill. It's been abolished, and he continues, and free those who by fear of death were in bondage all their lives. And literally it says, and to set free as many as have feared death through their whole living, in all of their living, having existed, having been in a subjection to slavery. Right? So he defeated death. He died through suffering to lead us into glory, to bring us to completion. He abolished, nullified the power of the one who held death. And here's how he did it. He takes away, he sets us free from that fear of death that we've had our whole lives. That fear that holds us in bondage. That fear that holds us in slavery. Because there's this question, whenever you are overcome with anxiety, when you're overcome by fear, the question that you follow with to walk through anxiety is when you think about what you're afraid of, you say, well, then what? Well, if this happens, then da-da-da-da-da. Okay, well, then what? Well, then yada, yada, yada. Well, then what? And you track it to the worst possible thing. And ultimately, the worst possible thing would be death. The fear of death. And so to a persecuted congregation, to a persecuted people that are facing suffering, whether they've experienced or seen it or just heard about it. Now these folks in Hebrews, they have not yet experienced suffering to the point of death. We know that from Hebrews chapter 12. But they know that others have. The persecution, the pressure is increasing. I mean, this is a period of time, again, when believers around the Roman Empire at points have been in Rome were set on fire as Roman candles. And this is a letter that's being written from Italy. It's being written from Rome, we find out at the end in Hebrews 13. So the folks he's writing to, they've not yet experienced what this writer has seen. And he's seen, but the one who's gone before us, who's led the charge, led so through suffering to perfect us and to set us free from the thing that we're so afraid of the worst possible thing of death here. He set us free from that. This is a big deal to a persecuted congregation. That Yeshua has now come and become among us. He saw it fitting. if he was going to be the priest, that he would come among us and share in that flesh and blood. And that he has set us free. He has released us. He nullified the power of death he died, and then he rose again, and he has ascended to the right hand of the Father. He has nullified the power of death and the power of the one who holds death, and he set us free from that lifelong, terrifying fear of death, that we were subjected to slavery our whole lives, and no longer. Now we can say, like Paul, well, if I live, it's Messiah. If I die, it's Messiah. You can't beat me. Death has no hold on me. And that's the underlying message here, and the overt message to this believing community that is persecuted, that's facing what's the worst that could happen. He said, well, he has freed us from that fear that we've been enslaved to our whole lives. Verse 16, for surely he's not concerned about angels. It's like, surely it's not angels that he's taken hold of, that he's grasping, epilambanetai, that he's grasping about, concerned about. But it's about the seed of Abraham, right? All of this that wasn't concerning angels, it's about you, he says. The angels are ministering to you who are about to inherit salvation. And he didn't become an angel, he became of us. He became of the seed of Abraham. That the one who sanctifies and the one who is sanctified are from the same. And so he became of the seed of Abraham. He became of that same stock so that he could be the priest of the same, standing on our behalf. It's not about angels. He did it for you. You feel afraid and you feel overwhelmed and you feel like, does he see me? And he sees you. Look what he did for you, for us. He became one of us. Verse 17 says, therefore he had to be made like his brothers. It uses the word to be, he had to be, like he was obligated. As though he had obligated himself. There was an obligation that he had. He needed to be made like his brothers, according to, in all things, kata panta, in everything, according to everything, in every way. So that, in order that that merciful, elemon, merciful, compassionate, he might become. So he might become a merciful and faithful Kohen Gadol. That he might become a merciful and faithful archieros, a high priest, chief priest, who is before God, who is toward God. Or it says in matters relating to God, but it's pros to pros ton theon, who is toward God. Right? To make atonement for the sins of the people, so that he became the high priest. He became of the seed of Abraham. He's not just some angel or powerful angel, but the same flesh and blood he took upon himself. And he knows suffering. He knows your suffering. Through his suffering, he is bringing us to completion, to perfection. Through his suffering, he defeated death and the power of the one who holds death, so that we're no longer enslaved to the fear of death. We no longer have to be terrified and trembling of death, because we know that it's momentary, and then forever we will be with the one who created all the ages, because he is the possessor of everything. And he was made to be, or not made, he was the inheritor of all things. And so on the other side of the worst thing that you're facing, you don't have to fear that anymore, because he's the possessor of everything. Of me. Of you. Because he himself suffered when put to the test, he's able to help those being tested. The chief priest, he became the son, became a son of many, leading us into glory, becoming of the same stock, being tested in every way. So now whatever you're facing, he's been through it. He's been there. He is able to help those who are also being tested, he says, to a tested community. We don't have to fear the worst. What can man do to me? If God is for me, who can be against me? right? And there is a hope, and there's something that elevates us beyond the fear of the worst thing in the present to get a perspective that lifts us, that he is leading us into glory. The one who is the very eminence of God's glory, who is the very, the perfect representation, the exact representation of his very essence. He is able to help us. Amen? So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom, Shabbat shalom. Have a beautiful day.